Today on Stronger Bones Lifestyle, I will be speaking with Dr. Brandy Cummings. She is a nutritionist and not just a nutritionist, she is a doctor of nutrition. And we are going to be speaking about environmental toxins and how they impact bone health. Welcome, Brandy.
Thanks, Debbie. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, so you actually work with women in resiliency during motherhood. So you work with, let's say, the 30, maybe even 40-year-old crowd, right?
Yeah, I'd say mostly 30 to 45-ish.
Okay, great. And I love that you do that. I wish I had someone like you when I was needing to be resilient during that crazy time of life, raising my 3 kids.
Yeah, for
Yeah, it's a
sure.
crazy time. Okay, so explain a little bit about why you do what you do.
I do what I do because I cannot stand the thought of a mom getting to the point where her kids are 18 and moving out of the house, and they're looking back and they are like, "Oh, shoot, I missed it." Like, it just went by so fast, and it was just a complete blur because they were just trying to get through the day to day and stuck in survival mode and planning their days around how they feel and unable to be present with their kids. And I am just not okay with that, just like not on my watch. And so that is why I work with moms now struggling with chronic illness. And I got kind of in that area of expertise from my own health journey. I had a couple years of my life where I was struggling with very severe mold and mycotoxin illness, and I had to quit my job and I couldn't shower myself, and just my mental health was deteriorating, and it just got really, really bad. I was in a super low point of my life. I had a miscarriage during that time. And then I finally found out it was mold and mycotoxin exposure from the place that I was working. And so then that just opened the door to this whole other area of health. And so now that's where I focus because that's where my experience lies.
I said I had 3 children, and when became a functional health coach in 2014, my kids were 14, 16, and 18. And at that point, I felt like I was walking through quicksand. I didn't uncover mold or any illness like that, but I started to run functional labs to get back to a really good energetic functioning place. So I could shower myself at that point. I mean, you saying that, it's like, wow, you got to a really, really low place. But it's so important because if we're taking care of others, we need that energy to take care of others. So it's amazing that this is what you're doing because there are so many that are going to benefit from the work that you do.
Aw, thanks, Debbie. Man,
Yeah,
I
it's
didn't know
really
it like this was gonna be a hype session for me. Thank you.
well, it's not even about, it's just thank you because we need this. I mean, the thing is that we are sicker than ever. We have more issues than ever. How often is it that a mother can't bathe herself? And I want to get into mycotoxins and talk about that. You mentioned that word and then you mentioned the word mold. Can you kind of just elaborate on those two? Because we say those because we know those terms, but I don't know that everyone knows those terms or even how they would be exposed to them in the first place or know that they've been exposed.
100%. So, we have molds, and some molds produce mycotoxins. So it's the toxic substance that some molds produce, and those are the mycotoxins. And we can get exposed oftentimes in buildings that have water damage. Sometimes we can't even see that water damage. It might be behind some drywall and we can't even see it. So for me, it was where I was working. Oftentimes, bathrooms, closets, places where there's moisture can be a source of exposure. And there's also foods that can be high in mycotoxins as well. Although sometimes, you'll see online, there's like a low mold, low mycotoxin diet where you're avoiding, grains and dairy and these foods that can have higher levels in them. And for some people, that might be totally necessary. But what I'm seeing in practice is that the majority of the exposure is coming from the environmental piece versus so much the food.
Okay, that's good to know. And then some of those foods, even like blue cheese, right? Isn't blue cheese considered a mold exposure to mold?
Yeah, so it's and a lot of coffee as well. So it's grains, dairy, coffee, dried fruit, beer, wine, um, blue cheese. Those are kind of the main culprits.
Yeah, and then if anyone is trying to make their own fermented veggies or sprouting, because I've done those over the years, sometimes there's a precarious time where you could get mold on those.
Yeah, yeah.
What about if we see moldy strawberries? If we open up a container and it has one moldy strawberry, should we throw away the whole entire container?
It's a great question. If there's visible mold on one, there's mold spores, on the others as well. Now, I say that everyone has their own risk tolerance. Everyone has their own resilience, right? If you are not struggling with chronic illness, if you have resilience and you are, robust enough, personally, I don't throw away the whole container anymore. I give them a good wash and I call it good enough.
Okay, well, that's good to know because you were at a point where that might have been an issue for you. So let's talk
Oh,
about that. Let's talk about that. So it's thanks for talking about molds, mycotoxins, and then also how they could be hidden. What are some of the symptoms? I'd like to say that, and then the testing that's done. So just tell me what the symptoms are that somebody might be like, "Wow, maybe this is what's wrong with me or my daughter."
mhm. For me, my biggest symptoms were vertigo, feeling very unstable and very out of my body, like I was not present in my body. A lot of people have vision issues. There's actually a visual contrast test that you can take online. That's kind of a screening tool. It's not diagnostic, but it's a screening tool. So lots of changes in vision, night blindness, ice pick headaches, fatigue, anxiety. For me, I had so much anxiety to the point where I was having panic attacks. I never in my life I didn't even really know what anxiety meant. When people were talking about being anxious, I was like, I can't even relate to that. I don't know what that is. I've never had that. And then I was having full blown panic attacks. A lot of people will have skin issues, either like weird rashes, or for me, I had something on my shins called erythema nodosum, which is kind of hot, hard nodules, red nodules on your shins that really, really hurt. And so lots of skin issues, GI distress, constipation, bloating. I see a lot of alternating between constipation and diarrhea. And then when we're looking at, well, we'll go into testing in a minute, but I think those are the main symptoms.
Yeah, and anxiety, that's a really interesting one because a lot of people have that and they think, well, that's a mental emotional thing. Yet there could be a physical cause of that mental emotional. And so that is what I notice when I run stool labs or work with ladies with gut health. The mental emotional layer starts to get better, whether it's depression, lack of energy, or even anxiety. There's a shift because our gut and our internal environment has a lot to do with what happens with our thoughts and our mental emotional state.
Yeah, and mycotoxins can create production of inflammatory cytokines in the body, and those inflammatory cytokines can incite what we call sickness behavior, and anxiety being one of those. This happens when we get sick. We have this production of inflammatory cytokines, and our bodies create this kind of sickness behavior, which keeps us wanting to not go anywhere. We want to rest, and it's all by design. The body is so infinitely more wise than we will ever know, and so it's on purpose. And that's fine if we're acutely ill, but when we're chronically ill, that's not so fine anymore.
What's the term that you just used?
Sickness behavior or inflammatory
Yeah.
cytokine?
No, sickness behavior. The body is so smart that it protects us.
That's
That's really, really an important thing to note. Yeah, this is such an intelligent 70 trillion cell being.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then a little bit about the testing. How would someone know then if they're suspecting this? How would they know? What is some of the testing that's done?
So we can do mycotoxin specific testing, which is a urine test, which is testing for, you know, if we are excreting mycotoxins in our urine. And that's a great test. It looks at different types and categories of mycotoxins. And then there's also a urinary organic acid test. And that test, it's not specific for mold and mycotoxins, but on the organic acid test, it has some fungal markers. And that can give us some more insight into if there may be colonization of mold in the body. So it's one thing if we're just exposed. It's another thing if we have colonization and growth of different species in the body. So the oat can help us kind of determine that. And then I like to look at blood chem as well. So markers that we might see out of balance on standard blood chemistry. Well, not standard. These markers might not be, just included in your average blood work, but people might see elevations in their liver enzymes. They could see elevations in CRP, which is C-reactive protein, and a marker of inflammation. Also, a marker that I see out of range a lot in this population is called MMP9. It's a marker you could request your doctor to order, but it's another inflammatory marker that could give us insight to not that there's mycotoxins, but that there's something in the body that's driving this inflammatory process.
Okay, so those are some of the tests. I run the oat and look and see mold potentially and fungus. And the one thing there that pertains to bone health is oxalates are on the mind right now. They're being discussed out there. Really having a healthy gut is what will manage oxalates, but there's a lot of demonization of bone protective foods because they're high oxalates when it's really looking at the why is your body not managing them correctly. So whether mold and fungus can play a role here in that. And that's something that we could see also on the oat. So just want to
Yeah,
say that from the bone
mycotoxins
health.
can produce oxalates.
Yeah, exactly. So then you see those elevation, and then some ladies say, "Wow, look at it, so high. I have to stop eating chia seeds and spinach and almonds." I'm like, "No, you need to heal your gut so your body can manage those foods that build your bones."
Yeah.
So let's talk about how this can all impact bone health. Mycotoxins, how do they impact bone health?
Oh my gosh, I love this question so much. So there's several different ways, and some of the ways, let's start with like how they can indirectly impact bone health. So certain mycotoxins, like you were just talking about gut health, can damage the integrity of the gut lining, which can then, of course, contribute to the health of our bones. I know that you've talked about the connection of gut and bone health before. Certain mycotoxins also trigger inflammation and those inflammatory cytokines that we were talking about, which can then impact our bone health. Um, More direct ways that they can impact bone health. So, some mycotoxins can inhibit production of osteoblasts and support production of osteoclasts. So we're having, less building of bone and more breakdown of bone. And some mycotoxins can directly impact the bone marrow. And then different mycotoxins can directly impact the collagen and the structure. And so there's this huge connection. And this is a topic where I see a lot of conversations about mold, but not a lot of conversations about mold and bone health. And we can see there's these indirect ways and then these direct ways. And it's really not on people's radar. So I'm just so thankful we're having this conversation.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you use the word indirect, right? Which just seems kind of in the background. And the two main things you spoke about when you talked about indirect, you talked about the compromised of the gut lining. So that is what is known as leaky gut. And a leaky gut leads to leaky bones. Nobody wants leaky bones. So that we could say it's indirect, but I'm going to say that that is direct. And then the next one you talked about was the toxins, the mycotoxins stimulate inflammation. Inflammation is a major root cause of bone loss. And actually, osteoporosis is an inflammatory disease. And that is a new concept. As we move away from the ridiculous way we've been managing bone health for the last 30 years, which is what my whole mission is to raise awareness that we've been doing it all wrong. And we need
Yeah.
to understand that this is an inflammatory condition. So we have to get to whether it's indirect or direct contributing factors of inflammation.
Yeah, and another way it could impact that might be more applicable to the age of the majority of the women in your audience is also that mycotoxins can interfere with estrogen metabolism and also vitamin D production, both of which play a role in bone health. So we can have that interaction as well. And then this is not a mycotoxin thing. It's a heavy metals. Some heavy metals, like especially cadmium, can increase parathyroid hormone, which can interfere with the calcium balance in the body and in the bones. And so that's another way that not mycotoxins specifically, but just too much heavy metals can impact as well.
Yeah, when your body is trying to manage things that it shouldn't be, the bones pay the price. And the reason why the bones pay the price is because they're the bank that stores the minerals that runs the show. And so this is another area like toxicity is a root cause of bone loss. There's 7 main root causes. There's inflammation, stress, hormone imbalance, mineral imbalance, toxicity, acidity, and sedentary lifestyle. And so many of the factors that you've been speaking about that mycotoxins play a role in are triggering those root causes.
That's right.
Yeah, and, your population is in the 30s and the 40s, and that's actually when bone loss begins. We build up until that point. You mentioned osteoblasts and osteoclasts. I call it bone building or bone dissolving, and where we start in the 30s, and then depending on how many factors we have that are taking the nutrients out of the bank in order to run the show, then you're gonna end up at 60 or later in life with less reserves, with less mineral density, with less bone quality inside the bones, which makes someone more prone to fractures.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that I'm so grateful for all the work that you do, Debbie, because what I see in my um population who's like you said is in their 30s and 40s, maybe a bit younger, like they're not even thinking about bone health. Like it's not even almost on their radar, and many of them don't even know that their bones do more than just give them structure, right? Like, people don't know how much your bone marrow does for you and where cells are produced and your immune system and everything is connected to this, but it's just not even on their radar that they're thinking about until they get older and maybe, now they have an osteoporosis diagnosis. And so I'm just so thankful for you just spreading this word and this message so that our younger people are hearing this.
Yeah, can you just say a little bit about that, about the bone marrow and how the bone what's happening there? You kind of briefly did it, but just what's happening in the bone marrow? Why does that matter?
Oh my gosh, well, our bone marrow is where we make our cells. And so inside of our bones, you have that kind of, soft squishy tissue. And that's where we make stem cells. That's where we make all kinds of our blood cells. It's also where our white blood cells are produced, which is what makes up our immune system. And we don't have a body if we don't have cells, right? And we need our bone marrow to be strong and making good, healthy cells. When I'm looking at like blood chemistry, right? And we're looking at, does this person have anemic tendencies? We're looking at their red blood cells. We're looking to see how rich in color they are. If they're normal color, if they're more pale or more red, we're looking at what size they are, if they're too big or too small. We want that Goldilocks size. All of that happens in the bone marrow.
Yeah, and this can be affected if you've been exposed to toxins. And
Yeah.
so raising our awareness, really important. Then the other thing, so you said the indirect and then you said the direct. Then you were speaking about the collagen matrix. This is, I like to think of the bones. If you think of a house and you drive by a house that's being constructed, you'll see the framework, all the wood that's there. Well, that's the collagen matrix. And then the stucco and the drywall and all the other stuff is the mineral deposits that give the bones the quality. And that's what makes them less fracture proof or less fracture risk if you have stronger, more dense, better quality bones. And so you're explaining that this is going to have an effect on that aspect of our bones.
Yeah, there's a specific subcategory of mycotoxins called trichothecenes that can impact the synthesis of the collagen. So, and this particular type of mycotoxin is very how do I want to say this? Potent, meaning it requires much less to cause much more damage in the body.
Yeah, and we need a strong foundation. If you're going to have you built up, just like a house that has layers or stories, you need your foundation to be really strong.
Yeah.
And then the other thing you mentioned was synthesis of vitamin D. And vitamin D, 99% of our calcium is stored in our bones, and calcium gets absorbed with the assistance of vitamin D. So, vitamin D plays a critical role in bone health. So, explain a little bit about that relationship between mycotoxins and vitamin D synthesis.
So essentially, it interferes with the ability for us to synthesize and produce vitamin D. So if we are having exposure to mycotoxins, and let's say we have two people that go out into the sun and get that, good vitamin D from the sun, and one of them is struggling with mycotoxins, their production is going to be less than the person who's not. And so if we are having heavy exposure and we have sluggish drainage pathways, then vitamin D production is going to be slowed. And one of my kind of pet peeves about the conversation around vitamin D in the functional medicine space even is there just seems to be a tendency to fix the test, right? Like we test your vitamin D and then we supplement with vitamin D and then we test again and oh, it's still low. We amp up the vitamin D supplementation, and get in the sun. And that's kind of where the conversation ends. But there's not this conversation about like, hey, wait a minute, why is the vitamin D low? Like what's going on? Is there toxins that's interfering with synthesis and production of vitamin D? Is there a magnesium deficiency that's interfering with vitamin D? There could be these other explanations for why vitamin D is low. And the answer is often not just like we just need to like mega dose and just keep supplementing until we can fix the test.
Yeah, that's interesting because megadosing vitamin D actually depletes magnesium. And magnesium is a critical mineral for so many body functions. With bone health, I learned this from a pharmacist. There's four musketeers of bone health: calcium, which 99% is in your bones, vitamin D helps it get absorbed, magnesium puts it into solution, and vitamin K delivers it to the bones. So it takes out of the soft tissue, not around your heart, not in your blood vessels, but get it, that hard mineral, into the bones. And so it's a balance. And I love what you're saying because I'm amazed. I'd say most women, when I look at their serum levels of vitamin D, are suboptimal.
Mhm.
And so, yes, then they are on a 50,000 IU or 10,000 IUs. And maybe in the short run, although, like you said, so what does it mean that your serum levels are up? Does that mean that whatever was causing that low number, wherever the deficiencies were in the system, have you actually repaired those? Or did you just temporarily put that number into a range that's going to be acceptable so we can test it in serum and say, oh, now you're here? But what happens when we stop doing those high levels and you go back to your typical regular dose? You're going to drop
That's
back
right.
down unless you get to the cause.
And there's even some research showing high dosing of vitamin D contributing to more absorption of toxic elements.
Ooh, interesting.
So
Maybe.
I just have like a pet peeve with the conversation about vitamin D that's on the interwebs because I feel like it's incomplete, you know? Glyphosate could contribute to the vitamin D levels being low, our kidney health, our GI, our liver health. It's like, are we looking at all these things too? Or are we just looking at the test and trying to fix the test?
Yeah, and then when you talk about glyphosate, so yesterday I was speaking with someone and she was telling me, she's a really good friend actually, and she goes, "Oh, you specialize in bone health? I haven't seen her in a while." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's totally what I specialize in now." She goes, "Oh, well," and then she tells me her story. She has been on a bisphosphonate for a year, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I don't tell anybody to go off of medications, but I try to educate them on what it is they're doing." And I said, "Well, that's not going to affect your bone metabolism. That's actually going to artificially stop the cleaning up process of your bones while you're on it." And she goes, "Yeah, now my nails are getting really fragile and they're peeling." I said, "Okay, so that's a sign that you're minerally imbalanced. You're not absorbing and digesting your minerals. You've got to heal your gut." And she said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, your diet is a big part of that." She goes, I said, "There's foods you shouldn't eat." She said, "What?" And I said, dairy, gluten, and sugar. She goes, "Oh my gosh, that's all I eat." I said, "Well, if you
Well,
want to take care of your bones, those are things you're gonna have to give up."
yeah. Yeah, there's even an article around comparing people who had high dose vitamin D, and I think I can find the article if you want to post it in the show notes, but I think the high dose was 10,000 compared to low dose, and I think the low dose is 400 if I'm remembering correctly. And the high dose group actually had lower bone density than the low dose group. So, vitamin D is so important. Like, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. It's so important, but understanding why it's low and fixing those things first is really important part of the conversation.
It is, and, everyone is on a vitamin D supplement, and conventional medicine, which is a very broken system when it comes to bone health and really has been doing things all wrong since the 1990s. The medications are the only tool in the toolbox, and now they've expanded into take a calcium supplement and a vitamin D supplement. We are finding that calcium supplementation is not the way to go because calcium, yep, same thing with vitamin D. Why do you not have the appropriate amount of calcium in your bones?
Yeah.
Figure out why your bones are not storing the calcium. That's the problem. I mean, that's the answer you're looking for.
Right.
Because if you take calcium and it doesn't stay in the bones, it's in your soft tissue. It coats the heart and the blood vessels. And the studies are showing that calcium supplementation, like even above 800, which the dose, the recommended dose is 1,000 below age 50 and 1,200 above. And so the studies are showing that women that were in the placebo group versus women taking calcium supplements, the calcium supplement group had heart attacks, a higher incidence of heart attacks. And so the conventional medicine, medication, number one, calcium was the next thing, and vitamin D. Now they're pulling back on the calcium. A lot of women are not wanting to go on medications because there's a lot that leaves to be desired with the medications.
Yeah.
They're still doing that vitamin D. And sometimes I see really high dosing. I see 5,000 or 10,000.
Yeah. Or
So, yeah.
50,000, like you said.
Or 50, yeah. And so, yes, it is, again, what you and I do is to look for root causes, to look for the why, because until you know the why, you cannot turn the ship around. It doesn't matter if you know the what. Okay, your vitamin D is low in serum. Why? Why is it
Oh,
low? And it's even like so you feel that way about this. You know what I feel in terms of blood or the bone markers in blood. So conventional medicine does the DEXA, which that in and of itself is another ridiculous way that we look at bone health because there's so many factors that could be wrong in the actual scan itself. But more than that, it's only looking at density, and density is not an indicator of the risk of fracture. And all we really want to know is how probable is it, likely is it that you'll have a fracture. So that's a big thing that happens there. But the other thing is the medication companies, the pharmaceutical companies, have serum markers, blood markers to look for bone breakdown or bone building, but they're doing it to monitor their medications, which happens at a much faster rate than natural bone remodeling. So women are now asking their doctors to run these tests, but I still say, okay, so that tells you what, but we don't know why. And in terms of one of them, the CTX, which I believe is a collagen peptide marker, it actually could be the time of day matters. If you slept well the night before, what you eat matters. There's like this whole list of things that will affect the outcome of that test. So yeah, it's a conventional medicine looking at looking at the what, not the why. And you're shedding light that toxins, toxic exposure throughout your lifetime is an area to pay attention to.
100%. I think sometimes you'll hear online where people will say, like, if anybody tells you you need to detox, like, it's just like quackery. Your body knows how to detox. Don't listen to that. They're just trying to sell you something. And it's like, I wish that were true. I wish that our environment was such that we didn't need to have this conversation because the body does know how, given the right environment and the right inputs. We're just not living in an environment that's conducive to that. So we do have to give it some extra support. And it's been Unbelievable since I really started focusing on this in my practice to see how symptoms can shift with this focus. I have a client right now who came to me with a 90-day cycle. I just met with her today. She had a normal cycle and she says, "Brandy, this is the third normal cycle I've ever had in my life." She wants to have a baby.
Yeah,
It's
because
crazy.
infertility is on the rise as well. So, and there's such a link between all of this. So hopefully we're raising some awareness about bone health in the, 30-year-old crowd, 30 and 40-year-old crowd,
Yeah.
but also that anything that's going wrong in the body is not good. Okay, you just brought up detox. I do think it's important to say a little bit about detox. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because you do have to be careful when you're detoxing, especially when you have some heavy metals, there's chelation that needs to take place. So, can you just give some guidelines on what is safe to do, what is unsafe to do, what can you do by yourself, and then when do you need to see someone like you?
Yes, this is such an important topic because you're right. People can do themselves some harm and make themselves feel a lot worse. And sometimes, it's just like the things that are just popular online that people gravitate to, like parasite cleansing is very hot right now. And people are just going like too hard, too fast, too strong, too soon. And they're getting themselves into trouble and not understanding the mechanism around the order that things need to take place. So I describe it to my clients like this. If your sink was clogged and your sink was filthy, what would you do first? If you go in there and start scrubbing your sink, you're going to have a giant mess, right? Like you can't do that. You have to clear the clog first. And so it's the same thing in our body. Our body has amazing built in drainage and detoxification pathways. Sometimes they're referred to as emunctory pathways that help to excrete and process toxins out of the body. So we have to make sure that we are pooping every day. At least once. More than once is great. We have to make sure that our liver is functioning well. Our liver does a lot of jobs for us, hundreds of jobs for us, and we need to make sure that it's doing that effectively. We need to make sure that our bile is nice and thin and flowing. If we have sludgy bile, then we're going to recycle our toxins instead of getting them out of our body. We have to make sure that our lymph is moving. The lymph doesn't have a pump, and so the lymph has to move somehow. We need to make sure that lymph is moving throughout the body. Our glymph is another detox drainage pathway. The glymphatic system is in your brain. It's how your brain does cellular cleanup. The glymphatic system is activated almost exclusively while you sleep. So if you're not sleeping and the glymphatic system can't activate, imagine the downstream symptoms, brain fog, fatigue, anxiety, things like that. And then we have to support all of this on a cellular level and make sure our mitochondria are functioning optimally and these biochemical pathways are churning and they're online. And so all of that has to happen first before we start going down like a heavy duty detoxification pathway, which I do recommend working with a professional to just make sure you're going about it in the right order and you're going about it safely. But I think the number one place to start is making sure you're pooping, making sure that that is happening at least daily. And sometimes when people come to me and they're constipated, I usually work with people who I'm not the first person they've worked with. So usually they tell me like, "Oh, I increased my fiber. Oh, I increased my hydration." That's great. That could help. But what I really want to know when people tell me they're constipated is like, what are you doing when you first wake up? Because when you first wake up, if you can get your stomach exposed to the infrared sunlight that's in the morning, the photoreceptors on our digestive tract will get that signaling from the infrared about what time it is, and it'll activate that migrating motor complex and get things moving. So, there's a to answer your question, there's a ton of components to this. It is important that you do it safely, but simple things, that you can do, like getting outside and getting exposed to the sunrise, and if you could have your stomach showing even better, could make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's really important. I love your analogy of the sink because it doesn't matter if you're cleaning it, you need to make sure the clog isn't happening. A
Yeah.
lot of the women I work with have constipation. Do you find that also in your population?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So that's a big one there. So, yeah, you can't just start cleaning the system unless the system is flowing. And you really do need to work with someone when you're dealing with some big issues like mold. First of all, you need to find out you have it. So you're going to need some functional lab testing. And then you're going to need to work with someone to help you safely and slowly do this process because it could feel pretty yucky,
Oh,
right?
you
You
could
could
feel
feel,
so
yeah,
bad.
yeah.
So bad. And there's no right timeline, right? Like, that's just a message I want everybody to hear. Some people, it takes years to go through this process because of their toxic load, because of if they have past trauma, because of how long they've been exposed, because of their genetics. Like for some people, it just takes longer and it doesn't matter. Don't compare yourself to other people. Just stay the course, slow and steady, work with the right people and do it on your timeline, and it's okay.
Yeah, so some things that the listeners can do, you mentioned out in the morning, sunlight, belly, so that you get that, was it migrating motor complex?
Hmm.
What do you call it? Yeah.
Yep.
So you stimulate that. Then, of course, hydration and making
Hmm.
sure you're drinking enough. Then also fiber, because fiber is going to be, I call it the dump truck. Fiber becomes the dump truck to take the waste out in the morning. We need that. And then I love to do an abdominal massage where I push pretty strongly in a
Yeah.
clockwise position to get things moving. So just for some tips with someone listening, if it's going to take them a little while to find a practitioner or to find you, or me, then those are some things that they could do right away.
Yep, 100%. And also, you mentioned fiber, but also I want to be even add an additional specificity around prebiotic fiber, because that can really help as well and has the additional support of supporting gut health, and gut health could be contributing to why you're constipated. So just making sure we're getting that prebiotic, those prebiotic rich foods in as well, which would be like apples, onions, asparagus, artichokes.
Green banana flour
Yes.
and avocados avocados. I know they have fiber. Is it a prebiotic?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Brandy, anything else you would like to share?
Gosh, I'm just so honored to be here. We have a summit coming up. Should we talk about the summit?
Yes.
So, I'm launching the Resilient Motherhood Summit February 28th through March 6th. This is a free event. And, this all goes back to my why that I mentioned at the top of this conversation. I don't want any mom to miss their kid's childhood because they don't feel good. I don't want you to, if you've been told that it's just part of motherhood, it's just the way that it is, your labs look fine, do not settle for that BS because you don't have to settle for that BS. And so, I have very carefully and methodically invited over 40 experts to help you identify what the very next best step in your health is. Debbie, you are coming. We had a great conversation all about bone health. I'm literally thinking about my safe spine space as we're having this conversation based on our interview. And so, anybody who is a mom, knows a mom, it's such a great event.
Yes. And if anyone is listening to this after the recording and after the airing of the summit, in the show notes will be a link for you to find it and purchase it so you can listen to all those great speakers. Because no matter where you are in your journey of life, you have bones and you need to protect them. And there's many other factors, whether it's toxicity and all the other speakers you have on there. So that can be found in the show notes as well. Brandy, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Debbie. I really, really, truly enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for joining me on Stronger Bones Lifestyle. Are you ready to take charge of your future? For show notes, resources, and information on my programs, please visit DebbieRobinson.com. If today's episode empowered you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs it. Together, we're building stronger bones and stronger lives. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.